Welcome to Studio Chat, an entertainment talk show covering movies, TV, music, and more. I'm Chelsea, here with a very special guest who is best known for his iconic and well-loved role as Eddie Munster in the classic Munsters TV show, but has also had a very interesting career in TV, film, and beyond, including the new Munsters film this year. Butch Patrick, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you. So we, of course, met about this interview at the Hollywood show, and you've been making appearances at celebrity and pop culture conventions for quite some time now. So at what point in your career did you start getting involved in that world?
Well, it was interesting. I stopped working in 75 actively in the industry, and then I just kind of went back and did what I like to do, which was surfing in cars and just being a regular guy. But in 1981, when MTV came on the air, a friend of mine was a drummer, a childhood friend, and he knew a producer that had a studio. So we wanted to make rock videos. So we had no experience in doing it. He was a bass player with Stuart Copeland in a group called Curved Air, and then Stuart went on to form the Police with Sting. And Phil wanted to get back in the music business as well. So we decided we would make a video, and it was called Whatever Happened to Eddie, of which I wrote the lyrics to the Munsters theme. And when we did this little video, the neat part about it was we were the first unsigned act ever to be on MTV at the time, which was kind of a cool thing, because a lot of times back then you had to have a record deal and it was a pay or play situation. So we cracked the ceiling of that. And when that happened, I recruited Grandpa Al Lewis to help me promote it, because I was on the East Coast and he was on the West Coast, and the band was on the West Coast. So he went out to the Hollywood Palladium and introduced the band. And from that appearance on, we started collaborating in personal appearances around the country, starting with, I believe the first thing we did was the Shriners Circus. We did some Shriners Circus stuff to benefit a good cause. And then the Comic-Cons were just starting to gain traction, and we started doing some personal appearances with that. And then from there, it just sort of steamrollered and spread out, because the Munsters was so popular and it had such a diverse background. We could tap into a lot of different things. And with the George Barris cars and everything, me being a gearhead, that was my area of expertise. And then Al, his restaurant in New York, that was his area of expertise. And that's when it all started, was the early 80s.
Very cool. Yes, you mentioned cars a couple of times. I've heard that you are into cars, and the Munsters certainly has a fair share of amazing cars between the Dragula, the Munster Koach, both of which you have in your own replicas. Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. Matter of fact, my builder just sent me a video of us firing up the new engine on the new Dragula, which is very exciting. It'll be done probably by the first of the year. My new Munster Koach, I had a Dragula and a Munster Koach, but they were built by a gentleman who was a Chevy guy. Very cool cars, but they weren't accurate. So I sold both of them, and I am now, I do have a really cool chopper, a Munster-inspired chopper that we designed about 15 years ago for a car club member that I bought recently. So I have the bike out in the garage. The Dragula will be here in about a month or two. That's going to be the world's most accurate, fastest Dragula. So I'm excited about that. And then the Munster Koach, with the small block Ford in it like it should be, will be done in June. And I'll be back with both cars and a bike in the middle of June. And I will be touring a lot of nostalgia drags, which I love, because when I grew up 16, 17 years old in the late 60s and early 70s, drag racing was just coming into its own with funny cars. So all these old nostalgia drags are perfect for an old guy like me with a cool car from the 60s. It fits right into the audience appreciation. So I'm going to be doing a lot of nostalgia drag appearances and doing exhibition blasts with the Dragula.
That's very cool. And especially I love the fact that it's going to be, the fastest, most accurate Dragula. That's really cool. What set you off into doing that project?
Excuse me?
What set you off into doing that project for the Dragula to make it as, make that accurate replica?
Well, we got the last coffin out of the mold from Keith Dean. His father, Dick Dean, worked with George Barris to design and develop the original Dragula. So we have the last coffin. We're making a mold from that one. So if other people want him, they'll have to come to us. I also made a mold of he had a Munster Koach when I picked up the coffin. So I bought that, knowing that someday I would probably need it, which I do now. So anyway, it'll just be fun touring around. George Barris was a dear friend. My favorite thing to do on the Munsters was to ride around in the Munster Koach. So it allows me a chance to do one thing America loves is they love road trips and they love cars. I like road trips, I like cars, and this allows me to do what I really enjoy doing, which is meeting fans at car shows, along the beach, around the country, and at drag strips. So I'm very, very lucky that I found a good niche for myself and the Munsters to go out and continue enjoying life and meeting the fan base, which is phenomenal.
Absolutely. No, there is a huge fan base for the Munsters out there who definitely appreciate the work that you're doing. And on that topic, let's talk about the new Munsters movie as well. Another notable fan of the Munsters is Rob Zombie, of course, who directed it. And I love that it's a universal picture, stays true to the original series in that sense. So you becoming the Tin Can Man, which is direct reference to the classic series. How did that first come about?
Well, it's funny. I was in Connecticut, and I had met Rob years ago briefly. I introduced him at a concert. He was wearing a Munster shirt. I was wearing a Rob Zombie shirt. It was pretty funny. But afterwards, what happened in December of 19, the Shout Factory, which is the company that reboots and remixes all kinds of old great TV shows and music and this and that, called me and asked me to come do a voiceover commentary with Rob Zombie in real time as we were watching the Blu-ray version of the Munster Go Home movie that we did in 1966. So Rob and I spent a couple hours in the studio together, just chatting and talking on camera about the movie. And before we parted ways, he alluded to me that he was going to be doing. He was close to getting the Munster movie rights to. He'd been pursuing them for like 17 years, and he was close to getting them. So he said he would be in contact with me at a later date. So when I was in Connecticut, he has a house in Connecticut as well. I was visiting. I offered to come out and bring my Munster coach out to his house and go for a spin through his area, and he was excited about that. So we went for a ride, and he explained to me that he had just come back from Hungary, where the movie had been shot, and he couldn't tell me anything about it because he was sworn to secrecy. And then basically, when I found out that there was a prequel, there was no Eddie and there was no Marilyn, but he had the Tin Can Man voiceover earmarked for me, and Pat Priest doing the voice of Transylvania Air as the flight attendant or cockpit person. That was fun. So we were involved a little bit, but I'm looking forward to probably a sequel coming up. If you've seen the movie, you know that they left it wide open because they just had introduced the family to Mockingbird Heights with a house, and Herman had just gotten a job. So it'll be interesting to see if it was successful enough. I believe it was. I think it was a big hit, and I think there will be a sequel. So we'll see if I might be involved in it a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. That'll be cool to see. And, I think it was definitely well done, a great homage and nod to the original series while still, putting Rob Zombie's unique spin on it. So I think you did a good job with it.
Yeah, I think he did too. I knew he had it in him, and I saw it, and everybody likes to have an opinion about it's not true to the original, and he's not not an R-rated blood and guts movie for him. But if you just enter into it with an open mind, I think most people did enjoy it. The naysayers were in the small minority.
Yeah, I agree with that definitely, and it'll, like you said, it'll be cool to see if a sequel comes out of this and see how you play into that. And I do want to ask a little more about the original series. You mentioned how you loved riding around the Munsters coach when you were in the original series. I'm curious about when you were acting from such a young age. Do you recall how you felt about the whole process? Did it feel like a real job to you, or did it just feel like playing around, playing a role?
I felt that I was definitely doing something special, but I didn't think that the attention was warranted. I was always very uncomfortable in my own skin, being famous. It was not something that I set out to do. I really just wanted to make money so I could save it. So when I got older, I would be able to buy a car and maybe go racing and wanted to be a race car driver. So I never really was comfortable with the fame factor. I lived like 25 miles from Hollywood. I didn't attend Hollywood events. It just wasn't really where my comfort zone was. But at the same time, it's been really, really good to me. And now that I'm an adult and been doing this for a while, it never ceases to amaze me how little effort on my part can bring a smile to someone else's face and a good memory and something that they, I was basically a part of millions and millions of families growing up that I wasn't aware of. That this show was very important to them, and it carried a lot of weight, and they had great fond memories of a lot of times with a loved one who's no longer with them. And when they meet me, it brings back these memories that they cherish so much. So here I am. I'm a very lucky guy that I get to go meet an extended family that I never knew I had, and by just interacting and engaging these people briefly and smiling and taking a photo or supplying them with a Munsters t-shirt or something, or you really make their day. I'm pretty blessed. So, anytime you can make somebody very happy for simply shooting up and showing up, you're a lucky guy.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm glad to hear that you recognize that connection as well. It's great that you've never rejected Eddie. You're comfortable with that character identity, with, identifying with people who loved you on the show, who loved the original show. Because it happens with a lot of child actors. They grow up and they say, I'm not that anymore. I don't want anything to do with that. But you've embraced the Eddie role and don't seem to mind that people still associate you with it, which is nice.
Well, it was this. I was very lucky. I worked in the '60s through the mid '70s. It was a great decade and a half. Music, movies, TV, cars, you name it. It was a really good time to be a kid and an adolescent and a young adult. So I was blessed in that window of opportunity. Plus, I was around very, very nice people. It was a fun set. It was fun to do. It was unique. It was a one of a kind show, never to be done again. Literally, I mean, they remade it, but they never did it the way it was done originally. So you had this very unique 2-year situation that just sometimes you get lucky, and that's all it was. I did the best I could. Apparently, people liked it. It was a believable show with crazy, wacky overtones. But to this day, I have a lot of people come up and say that was my favorite show. Not like one of my favorites. It was like my favorite show, or it was my dad's favorite show, or I used to hear my grandpa laugh from the other room, and we used to set our, I mean, it was amazing how many people remember it. And then with the new Rob Zombie thing, that just adds a little bit of another dimension on top of it.
No, definitely. Yeah, it's probably bringing another additional layer of memories, or for people who had a connection to the Munsters but maybe haven't thought about it in a while, it's kind of refreshing that and getting them back into it. And you definitely did an excellent job with the role. And you had a few sort of stints in acting before the Munsters officially, and everyone else on the show, of course, had their own acting careers pre-Munsters. Did you know, or had you seen the work of any of your fellow cast at that time, or were they more just people you got placed in there with and got to know later on?
I had watched Car 54. I
Nice.
was watching a
Yeah.
lot of Mr. Eds and a lot of the black and white shows of the period. I watched them. I grew up watching '50s sitcoms and things like that. But I didn't know who Yvonne DiCarlo was. My mom educated me to that one about with the Ten Commandments and that she was a big movie star.
Yes.
Beverly Owen was an unknown actress, so I wasn't familiar with her. But Fred and Al, yes, I was. And it worked out really well. The best part about the show was a couple things came into play that made it magic. Well, number one, Universal was the monster studio, so they really had very cool sets and they had very cool makeup, and they knew how to do the monster genre, black and white, making it look spooky. And then you had Leave It to Beaver, producers and writers, for a 6-year run with a very kid-friendly show. In fact, the first real kid point of view show that was ever done very successfully. They adapted the Munsters into this Universal Monster Studio, and together they squished them together and came up with magic. So it was very unique, very short run. We did 70 episodes in a couple-year period, but it stuck. And we became one of the first and most successful syndicated shows of the era. And as far as merchandising goes, the toys and the Munsters and the licensing and all the merchandising allows me to do Comic-Cons and memorabilia festivals and this and that alongside the cars. And I've actually even done tattoo festivals overseas, because the Universal Monsters and the Munsters are very popular in the ink community.
That makes a lot of sense, definitely. And yeah, that's a good point that, you don't always think about the merchandising angle of it, but that was huge for the Munsters too, because you had this unique aesthetic, unique characters, everything to do with it. It definitely is something that easily caught on, I feel like.
Yeah, it was a very successful show. And if you had to pick one, when you think about the thousands and thousands of shows over the last 60 years that have been made, to be attached to one of the, I won't say top 10, but, one of the top 50 or 60 shows, and maybe even the top 20, you're a pretty lucky guy. And it just, the fan base, like I said earlier, is astounds me, because when I get out there and it's young kids who have been introduced to it, if they see it, they like it. And that's all you have to do is set them down, and the families love it because it shows old family values that they grew up with that are, so sorely missing today.
Very good point. You also had a lot of post Munsters appearances, some right after the show. So was it weird to you at that time to no longer be Eddie Munster every week, or did it just seem like a really interesting couple years and you easily moved on to other roles?
Yeah, for me, it was very easy. I adapted very quickly to how Hollywood works. You get very close to people. You're an actor. You're reading other people's lines. You're interacting with people, and you get along well. But when it's over, it's over. You go back to your family. You go back to school. The adults go on with their lives, and I worked with Eddie Albert twice in my first role, and then I worked with him again about a year later, and it was kind of like, oh, nice to see you again. I'm your son again. And as soon as it's done, no, I'm not your son anymore. I'm off to do something else, and he's off to do something else. So it's an interesting dynamic that, it's good not to get too attached, because it is temporary work. It's a series of temporary jobs, an acting career. But I never really was an actor. I was simply a kid who could handle dialogue and was having a good time, and it was interesting to do. And I enjoyed the studios. I enjoyed being out there and seeing what everybody else was up to. But I never looked at myself as, like, like uppity, or my ego never got in the way. I was always, I'd like to consider myself pretty humble and appreciative of where I was at, but I never wanted to be a star, or I never really wanted to be an actor. I was just a kid that had a knack for acting.
And that worked for you. And I think, that humility definitely does show. And that is why people also feel connected with you too. Cause you come to all these conventions, you're easily approachable, and they can talk to you about their memories of the Munsters, which is great.
Well, what I try to do is I try to engage people by, talking to them about what their deal is, what's going on, where are they from. I can usually find some common ground. I'm well traveled. I've been around. My dad was a pro ball player. My stepfather, drag racing was a big thing, and dirt bikes. And so I had a regular kid life, which most people do. So if you pretty much, all they want to do when they come to the table is engage you a little bit. And if you can start making them feel comfortable and have a conversation regarding something close to them, it certainly makes for a better experience for everybody.
Definitely. And outside of the acting world, you've had some involvement with the music world too. Aside from the MTV video that you just mentioned, you also, I assume it's true that you play bass, and you have been in some bands over the years. Can you talk about what made you pick up that instrument specifically, and some of your fun music moments?
Well, owning a bass and playing a bass are vastly different. It's like being a golfer and having golf clubs.
Interesting.
when I was 18, I asked for a bass for Christmas, and my mom wound up getting me a bass and an amp. And I really enjoyed having it and plunking it around and making noise and this and that. But I never really buckled down and learned it properly. But what happened with in 1971, when I had for the first record go around with Metro Media Records, they were just looking for a teeny bop star to replace Bobby Sherman, and I had just completed Lidsville, so I had the credentials of the 16 magazine and Flip and Tiger Beat and all that stuff, and they wanted me to sing, and I said, I don't sing. I really don't sing. I can't carry a tune. I'm sorry. Thanks for the thought. They go, it doesn't matter. We'll fix it. And then I said, no, I don't feel comfortable. Then they said, how much money did you make doing this? And I said, this. And they go, well, this is how much money you can make doing this. And I went, really? And I said, well, okay. I like going to concerts. I like music. Maybe this can work. A few weeks later, I'm on American Bandstand. We recorded a song, Sugarloaf, which was a pretty good sized group for the day. It was my backup band in the studio. And we went out on the road. But the problem was, it was very difficult selling a musical act that couldn't perform live. And they knew that going in. So for me, I just went along for the ride and played rock star for a year. And we spent a whole bunch of money and stayed in the best hotels and rode around in limousines. And I recommend it highly for everybody that should do it for a year. But I like to consider myself the original Munster Manili.
Oh my goodness. Now that's a new one. I like that.
And then when Eddie and the Monsters came out in '81, I wrote the lyrics, but again, my singer was the guitar player who sounded a lot like me, and he just had a better voice. I probably could have pulled it off later on because my voice changed a little bit. And then my producer, the bass player, Phil, he played bass. So I faked the bass and I faked singing on the second one, although I did write the lyrics. And then we never really went on to do much after that. So I did have a little bit of a record career, but I was never really a musical talent. So there you have it.
Okay. Still it's an experience, and you have stories from it. So that still works.
Oh, yeah. And I went to high school with the Cowsills, who were huge. They were like really dear friends of mine, still are. And being around real musicians and real music people, I have a huge appreciation for what they do.
Definitely. Another connection with the music world. You were, while you were still a kid, in an episode of the Monkees as well, who is another part of iconic nostalgia, pop culture there, as well as some great musicians themselves. So what was it like working with them?
That was probably my favorite, aside from the Munsters. I'm most proud of the Monkees episode for a couple of reasons. For one, I was a huge fan. I was 14 years old, 8th grade. They were as big, if not bigger than the Beatles at the time. I normally would never tell people when I went on an interview whether I got it or whether I didn't get it, because it was just not that important to me. But when I went for this interview, I really tried very hard to get this part. Normally, I would walk in, do my best, and go home, and that was it. You get it, you get it. You don't, you don't. I lobbied hard for this one, and I got it. And I came home, and everybody in school knew about it. And then the best part about it is it wasn't like just a little, a kid on the Monkees where you walk in and you say a line or two and you go home, and in an hour and you're done. I was on there for a whole show, the whole week, and I was interacting with all of them a lot because the show's about them babysitting me and teaching me about the meaning of Christmas. And so I really worked as an equal with them. In fact, I probably had more. In fact, I did have more acting experience than they did at the time, because I had been working for like 7 years and they had been working a few years. So it worked out so well. I loved it. I remained friends with everybody, and it was a real feather in my cap as far as a 14-year-old kid spending. And it's a very good episode, for not because I'm in it, but because the way the show ends with them singing and then introducing all the people from behind the camera, that made the show so special. And I thought that was wonderful. And that was an example of how fun the show was and how they operated as such approachable and nice guys.
Absolutely. It's wonderful for me to hear this story, because I've always been a big fan of the Monkees myself, and I've always admired you as well. So I loved that connection there. That's definitely a fantastic episode. And you're right, that ending was perfect. It had perfect Christmas time spirit, and just, hey, here's who's behind this. Here's what's making this happen, as well, which is great, because you don't always see that kind of nod to the crew in that way.
I agree. And they said, and singing Ryuchu a cappella was wonderful.
Yes.
A really good episode. Beautiful. In fact, a lot of people, when they meet me, they say, that's my favorite Monkees episode. So I go, oh, I'm glad I could be part of it. Mr. Melvin Vandersnoot.
Great name. Perfect. And speaking of crew, was there anyone from the crew of the Munsters, or pretty much any show you've been on, that you have good memories of, or someone who left an impression on you in any way?
Well, we had a lot of guests. As far as impression professionally on camera, I really enjoyed Paul Lynde a lot as Dr. Dudley. He was just so funny. We had some really nice directors that were really good guys. Jerry Paris comes to mind, who was Dick Van Dyke's show Next Door Neighbor. Ezra Stone was a child star in the radio back in the 30s. We had a lot. Earl Bellamy was great. Behind the scenes, Mike Westmore was my makeup man, and I just idolized him. He was handsome. He drove a Jaguar. He was a bachelor. He was just, really, really a cool, suave guy. And in the morning, when you go to work, the first person you spend time with is the makeup man. So your whole day sets the tone for that. I loved going to the lab and seeing what they were up to making for, other people's shows. And then I also enjoyed the just being able to roam the Universal back lot and go see what everybody else was up to was a kid's dream, because you like to go explore. And I had this incredible backyard to go explore for a couple of years, from the time I was 11 to nearly 13. Good times for a kid. That's a good period of life for someone to be, kind of educating yourself to the world around you. I just happened to do it at a really cool place.
Definitely. No, that must have been a great setting to be growing up in, which is super cool. And, another thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about connections with musicians over the years and how you appreciate the music world. I did want to ask you about the music video, I Am John 5. It's a connection that makes sense because Rob Zombie, John 5, and you were a voice in that video. Just talk a little bit about your involvement in that.
Yeah, how get you, John 5? Yeah, John is. I met him at a convention. What a great guy! What a nice guy! And and congratulations on the Motley Crue, takeover. Rob is back with the Riggs, who's another great guy from White Zombie. So everybody seemed to wind up back where they were supposed to be, and so congratulations on that. But yeah, John was a wonderful guy. He actually asked me to introduce himself in the Creatures, because he's got a really killer band himself. What a great guy, incredibly gifted guitarist, but a fan of the show, a fan of the Munsters, a fan of the genre. And he asked me to be a part of his I Am John 5 video, which was a really cool video.
Definitely. That's cool. You've made a lot of cameos and appearances and films and shows and just, projects like that in recent years. What's been some of the more interesting projects, maybe your favorite projects you've worked on since the Munsters?
Well, when I was a kid, I also did Chuck Jones's only feature film called The Phantom Toll Booth, which I did that from the time I was about 14. Right about the Monkees. I had a little window after the Munsters, Disney, Phantom Tollbooth, Monkees, Adam 12s and stuff like that. I did a pretty good job. And then I did several My Three Sons. I did 9 episodes of My Three Sons. So I sporadically kept busy. I never really tried to work as much as I could. It was more of a thing. If it was convenient, it was a window of no baseball game or no football game, I'd go on interviews. But I guess the thing that I enjoyed the most of the mid-teen situation in Hollywood was just watching, being able to go to studios and go see other people work, and then just hanging around and watching stuff that I knew how things were happening and this and that. It was just a good time. I can't really remember any specific stuff. All I know that I enjoyed myself, and I was always bringing home fun stories of things that were happening.
Definitely. And you still have a lot of fun stories to share now, which is awesome. It's been really great getting to know these stories and your experiences and how you feel about the Munsters and everything beyond. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Butch.
Well, and also for your listeners, if anybody wants to know anything about me, simple. It's really hard to remember. Write this down, munsters.com.
Nice and easy, munsters.com. Do you have any current projects or appearances on the near horizon you'd like to talk about to close it off?
Well, I've been doing a lot of independent movies lately. For some reason, people have been writing scripts and asking me to be involved with them. So, too many to list. But yes, I do have one that I'm very excited about. It's called Haunt Improvement, which is a show featuring Tom Devlin, who was the runner-up on Face Off with Mackenzie Westmore. It's the competition show about makeup artists and how they do their thing. And he's got the world-famous Monster Museum in Boulder City, Nevada. We met. I had an idea for going around the country and helping people with haunted attractions, because I've done so many of them over the last 30 years, that we decided to make a show about it. And it's kind of like Home Improvement, but it's called Haunt Improvement with the two of us. So keep an eye out.
Definitely. That's awesome. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. I noticed you mentioned the name Westmore. Any connection with your makeup artist there?
Well, no, Mike actually he's in my book, Munster Memories. Yeah, he's there, and I do see Mike occasionally. I talked to Mackenzie, his daughter. But yeah, I believe that we will probably work a deal to where Mike will probably come on camera. Yes, I believe that will happen.
Very cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, good stuff to look forward to. And of course, you've always got appearances on the horizon. So munsters.com. We'll all keep an eye out. Thanks so much for your time today, Butch.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thanks.
Bye.